Welcome to the GRESB training program. This lesson explains how to complete the entity and reporting characteristics for the asset assessment using the GRESB assessment portal. In this video, we'll introduce the entity characteristics and reporting characteristics and explain how to report on each of these. Along the way, we'll briefly explain how reporting boundaries, materiality-based scoring, and peer grouping work within the assessment. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to complete the entity and reporting characteristics of the asset assessment. Following this lesson, we recommend that you review the lessons on the management component of the asset assessment. The entity and reporting characteristics are the starting points for completing the asset assessment. Let's first take a look at the entity and reporting characteristics part of the asset assessment. Entity characteristics identify the characteristics that remain constant across different reporting years. These are entered into the first portal page titled New Asset Entity after creating a new entity. For returning participants, entity characteristics are pre-filled, but you should still check and update them if necessary. The entity name will be used to identify the entity in the GRESB portal and will be displayed in the entity's benchmark report. The entity is the asset for which the assessment is submitted. Evidence in relation to the entity can come from any of the organizations involved with the activities within the entity boundaries. For the asset, the entity may include the asset itself, the asset manager, the asset operator, and the asset maintainer. In this example, the reporting entity is Big City Airport. This asset is part of Infrastructure Fund 4, which is managed by Fund Manager LLC. Information pertinent to the asset assessment for Big City Airport may come from Big City Airport Management itself, the operations contractor, or the maintenance contractor. In some cases, Fund Manager LLC may also provide relevant information for the assessment. The airline El Cheapo Air, although a user of the airport, is outside of the reporting entity boundary, and so information relating to El Cheapo Air would not typically be relevant to the assessment. The next indicator focuses on the entity's nature of ownership. It is very important to provide the correct nature of ownership because this status is used by GRESB to define peer groups and to share results. Data collected through the asset assessment is only disclosed to the participants themselves, and in the case of non-listed infrastructure assets, to GRESB Fund Manager members that linked to the asset, and GRESB investor members that request access to the asset in the portal. In both of these cases, the participant decides whether to accept or deny these requests. And two, in the case of listed infrastructure companies, to all GRESB investor members that invest in listed infrastructure securities and have a listed data subscription. If the entity is public, then you will be required to provide an International Securities Identification Number or ISIN. For the next indicator, state the year when the entity first commenced or is expected to commence operation. If the reporting entity represents a portfolio of facilities being assessed as one asset, i.e. a multi-facility asset, then it should be when the first facility in the portfolio commenced operation. If the entity is still under construction, sometimes known as greenfield asset, enter the expected year when operations will commence. If the entity is both in construction and operational, enter the year when the first part of the project commenced operation. Setting and describing appropriate boundaries for reporting on ESG is critical for consistent data collection and for comparing data between entities and over time. The asset assessment includes indicators that help to accurately describe the boundaries of reporting for each entity. EC4 reporting year describes the temporal boundary for reporting. RC3, sector and geography, includes a list of asset facilities with their geolocations, thus describing the physical boundary for reporting. And RC4, ancillary activities, includes the list of ancillary activities undertaken by the entity, thus describing the operational boundary for reporting. Everything within the boundary should be reported on within the relevant indicators, and everything outside the boundary should not be included. This indicator simply sets the entity's annual reporting year. If the reporting using calendar year, select that option. If reporting using a different year, fiscal or financial, then select that option and specify the starting month. You must use the most recently closed reporting year. All responses in the assessment must refer to the selected reporting year. See the table for details. Reporting characteristics describe the entity, define the reporting scope for the current reporting year, and determine the structure of the assessment submission. The reporting currency is stated in Indicator RC1 and must be used consistently throughout the assessment. In RC2, participants specify the entity's economic size in terms of gross asset value, revenue, and a number of full-time equivalent employees as well as contractors. The monetary values must be completed in millions for this indicator. The gross asset value should reflect the tangible fixed assets or property, plant, and equipment associated with the infrastructure asset. The revenue should be the annual income generated by the entity in exchange for providing the asset service. Like all information provided to GRESB, this information will be kept confidential, visible only to you and any investors to which you give permission. These data points are used as denominators to calculate intensity performance metrics. The information provided for the indicator on sector and geography is used for peer grouping, materiality-based scoring, and boundary reporting. It is up to participants to determine the best structure for reporting facilities since they have the best understanding of them. Each facility should be assigned a relative weight based on the actual or estimated proportion it comprises of the total asset GAV. The sum of all the facility weights must total 100%. If there is no clear address for the entity, you should provide the latitude and longitude coordinates. It is very important to select the correct facility sector by clicking on the drop-down list or by typing in a keyword. Only list the facility's core sector, its main infrastructure service. If there is more than one core sector for this facility, then consider splitting it up into multiple facilities with one core sector per facility. The full list of sectors aligns with the EDHEC InfraTICS standard industrial classifications. Facility information is aggregated to define a primary sector and primary location for the asset and is shown below the facility table. The primary sector is determined based on the mix of facility sectors as follows. If 75% or more of the facilities belong to a single subclass, the asset's primary sector will be that subclass. Otherwise, if 75% or more of the facilities belong to a single class, the asset's primary sector will be that class. Alternatively, if 75% or more of the facilities belong to a single superclass, the asset's primary sector will be that superclass. And finally, if less than 75% of facilities falls into a single superclass, the asset sector will be diversified. Similarly, the primary location is determined based on the mix of facility locations as follows. If 59% or more of the facilities are located in a single country, the asset's primary location is that country. Otherwise, if 59% or more of the facilities are located in a single subregion, the asset's primary location is that subregion. Alternatively, if 59% or more of the facilities are located in a single region, the asset's primary location is that region. And finally, if less than 59% of the asset's facilities are located in a single region, the asset's primary location will be listed as globally diversified. The example on this slide demonstrates the process. In this case, the two facilities are not of the same subclass or class, but more than 75% is of the same sector at the superclass level, and the entity's overall sector is determined to be renewable power. Similarly, the facilities are not located in the same country, but more than 59% are in the same region, so the primary location assigned is Europe. Let's take a look at how peer groups are set for benchmarking purposes. Each participant is assigned to a peer group based on the entity's primary sector, primary location, and other factors. To ensure participant anonymity, GRESB will only create a peer group if there is a minimum of 6 participants allocated to the peer group, the participant plus 5 other peers. Peer group assignments do not affect an entity's score, but determine how GRESB puts participants' results into context. The goal of the peer group creation process is to compare participants who share important characteristics, while A, maintaining a minimum threshold of 6, and B, having less than 50% of the participants in the group from the same company. This table explains how peer group allocation works. We first look at the most granular level of the sector, which is subclass. If there are 6 participants in this subclass, then we check whether there are enough participants within the same country to create a peer group. If not, then we look at if there are enough participants at the sub-region level and so forth. If there are less than 6 participants in the subclass level, then we go through the same process at the class level and so on. The next indicator requires that ancillary activities engaged in by the entity be selected, and for the participant to indicate whether these activities are included within the reporting boundary. Ancillary activities are those activities engaged in by the entity that assisted in providing its core service, but which are not its main activity. This information is used in combination with the facilities and reporting year descriptions to describe the entity's reporting boundary. All significant activities engaged in by the entity outside of its main activity should be selected. Insignificant activities typically make up less than 1% of the entity's budget, resourcing, or revenue, so excluding them from ESG reporting still provides a complete picture to stakeholders. Also indicate which of the ancillary activities are included within the boundary of ESG reporting of the entity. Select the nature of the participating entity and relevant sub-options as follows. First, select whether the entity structure is corporate, a special purpose vehicle, or some other structure. Next, select the most significant business risks or revenue basis borne by the entity out of the options merchant, concessionary or contracted, regulated, or other. This aligns with the EDHEC Infra TICS classification for business risk. Multiple answers are possible. Last, select whether the entity provides associated services in addition to providing the asset itself. The associated services may be asset maintenance and/or asset operation. This determines whether the scope of services provided by the entity is asset provision and maintenance, asset provision and operation, or asset provision, maintenance, and operation. This information is used for materiality-based scoring and to determine peers for the benchmarking and reporting purposes. In RC6, you are asked to provide a description of the asset. This may include such details as purpose of the entity's operation, services provided by the asset, ownership and governance, market position of the entity, and a link to its website. It is also possible to upload a photo of the asset, which may be used for marketing purposes. The GRESB materiality assessment uses a series of factors and questions to determine the materiality of the ESG issues specific to the entity. Completing this indicator determines the materiality or level of relevance for each of the ESG issues, which determines scoring for these issues throughout the assessment. These weightings are displayed at the bottom of the indicator in the portal. It is important to understand that completing the GRESB materiality assessment accurately ensures that the assessment is tailored and scored accurately to the entity's particular context. For more information, see the lesson on materiality-based scoring. Thank you for taking the time to complete this lesson. We hope that it helped you understand how to complete the entity and reporting characteristics. For any questions, you can contact us at gresb.com/contact.